So the first act I talked about when going over this project was the Individuals with Disability Education Act. And the reason I did this one first, besides that you formatted it that way, is because I think that this specific act is just like the big umbrella that encompasses all of these other acts and kind of is the main route. What I wrote down for this one is that it protects any people from infancy to age 21, and that it was first enacted in 1975. The book mainly just talks about how this act itself includes all the other ones we talk about, and I think it kind of goes without saying, as it is just the Disability Education Act. As far as a teacher, as far as being a future teacher, I think that this one would affect me in that it all goes back to accommodating and advocating for any child with a disability. The next one, FAPE, or Free Appropriate Public Education, I wrote down that parents and family members cannot be asked to pay for special education services. School districts will need to bear the cost for any student placement that is in an environment outside of their original school district. The FAPE must cater to the student's IEP, and I wrote that down because I think that is what's going to affect me the most as a future teacher when it comes to this specific act. I know you talk a lot in class about how we need to really be involved in the creation of our students' IEP, and I think that really comes into play with all of these acts, but with FAPE saying that it's going to cater to the student's IEP, we need to be involved and know what we're signing and know what we're going to be accommodating to all year, specifically when it comes to acts like FAPE. The next two, Section 504 and ADA, were hard for me to remember which one made each other different, but for Section 504, I put no person can be excluded in any way from any federally funded activity or environment. So what I'm trying to remember is that Section 504 is federally funded and ADA is not. So for Section 504, besides that, I put, in my future as a teacher, I am bound to encounter students with physical or health disabilities, and it's my job to find ways every day to include them. Since it's not funded by the federal government, it is my job as a classroom teacher to make sure my students are accommodated for and monitored for any extra help they might need. So in the book, they gave an example of a student with type 1 diabetes and making sure that there were snacks for the children. It's not federally funded, but I can remember students in my grade school having to go to the nurse and eat packs of crackers because they had diabetes. So there is ones like that, or even though the ADA is the act that makes sure that buildings and restaurants and places besides schools actually have the physical accommodations for people, whether it be closed captioning or wheelchair ramps, braille on signs for people who can't see. The 504 is where we're going to come in and make sure that these students are being accommodated for, whether it's, keeping them fed correctly if they have diabetes, or even just, I think the main thing for me as a future teacher with these two is making sure anything I plan for, any, games we're going to play, anything we do or I plan or I schedule as a teacher needs to be just as capable for my students with physical disabilities as it is for any of my other students. The next one I wrote down and worked on was LRE, or Least Restrictive Environment. What I put for this one is that least restrictive environment protects students with disabilities in their right to learn in the same environment as their peers. If I as an educator think they cannot handle my general classroom environment, it is my job to give data and justification as to why I believe they need to be moved into a more restrictive environment. I know you talk a lot in class about how drastic it is to move a student to a more restrictive environment and how we need to avoid that if at all possible, and I totally agree with that as a future teacher. I think we should all aim to work with our kids who are struggling instead of sending them out. And I understand sometimes, they're going to have to step out for a while and work with SPED teachers, but it's my plan as a future teacher to work with them and do whatever I can to keep them in the same environment as their peers. The last one that I'm talking about is the zero reject. The main thing I wrote down is that students with AIDS cannot be excluded from schools. It's not really one I ever thought about, but it is important because they deserve right to education as anyone else. But I think this one is important in that it deals with the child finding system because, again, it is our job to accommodate and identify these students, not diagnose them, but identify them and do whatever we can to give them their right to a good education.